Good morning. Happy Easter, everyone. And thank you, Bruce. That was a beautiful version of that song. Love that. So welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Stuart, Florida. I'm Deb Harris. Today is April 4th, 2021. We're pleased to have you all here today with us, and we're very happy to have the Reverend Bob MacDonald in our pulpit today. We thank Bruce Ruby, our music director. We thank Corina Pelloni, our Zoom host, and we're very happy that you're all here with us. We will mute everyone to avoid any noise in the background. Please remain muted at this time. We are a welcoming congregation. We welcome people of all gender identities, races, ages, and backgrounds. We hold our Zoom services every Sunday at 11 o'clock. To be put on our email list or to find out more information about us, please go to our website. It's tcuuc.org. If you go to our website and sign up, you'll get announcements in our Friday online newsletter, and you'll get a midweek follow-up from the sermon. Bob will now light the chalice in our sanctuary. Our chalice lighting words this morning are adapted from Dillman Baker Sorrells. For holy days like today, on which we recall the old stories, we light the flame. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom in the past, we light the flame. For Easter, which reminds us that love is our greatest challenge, we light the flame. For gathering together in spirit today, we light the flame. For the opportunity to be together in spirit as a community, to remember the past, to plan for our future, and to be alive in our present, we light the flame. The Easter season feels more special than usual to me this year. I always love spring and Easter and everything that comes with it, the bunnies and the chocolate, and all those goodies. But this year it seems especially important, this promise of spring, the promise of brightness and light after such a dark winter, and new life, new possibilities, new hope. May this be a spring of renewal after our long COVID winter. These words by Elizabeth Strong helped capture, I think, the feeling I had. Out of the earth rises light, rises life, rises spring. May we join with the miracle that is springtime and enter into life with lightness and joy. Out of the Spirit rises faith, rises hope, rises love. May we join with the miracle that is Easter time and enter into life with hope and love. Let us resurrect with spring. Let us resurrect with the Spirit and enter into renewed life as we gather into our time of worship together this Easter morning. And now, Bruce will play and sing hymn 269, Lo, the Day of Days is Here.
Festival of hope and cheer. Hallelujah. God the Son Fruits are smiling in the sun. Hallelujah. Loosen streamlets, seaward run. Hallelujah. Tender blade and weeping here. Hallelujah. 'Tis the springtide of the year. Hallelujah. Lo, Easter tide is here. Hallelujah. Music thrills the atmosphere. Hallelujah. Join you people and sing. Hallelujah. Love and praise and thanksgiving. Hallelujah.
And now, although you're muted, let's recite our affirmation, speaking the first verse and singing the second. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
From all that will be lost skies, let faith and hope and love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung from every land, by every tongue. Amen.
And now we have a very special story for all ages today. Anne Nozawa will share the meaning of Passover, then and now. Anne says she knows there are others of Jewish roots in the congregation who might be also willing to speak to this, but she was willing and available, and we're so glad that she volunteered because her insights are invaluable to us. So here's to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe I'm unmuted now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome all you former children. Good to talk to you. I remember when I was a child, Passover was hands down my favorite holiday in the year because not only was there good food and interesting games to play, but our family got together. Some people from New York and other states, and just other people local who were too busy to come and visit us as usual. So I liked having the entire family together. And I was very fortunate because I was the first grandchild. And the tradition at the Seder is for the youngest person present who is able to ask the four questions, the traditional four questions. Now, you probably know that a Seder is the retelling the story of Passover, what happened. And there's a little book, and traditionally, even now, thanks to Maxwell House, they reprint it every year. And if you go to the supermarket, you can see a Haggadah in the Maxwell House display. So it's in there in English and in Hebrew. And this is a way that Passover passes on the customs of the Jewish people to our Jewish kids of today who are gradually not only intermarrying, but in other ways losing interest in the tradition. So I liked it for its upholding of the tradition also, because I did learn Hebrew and I enjoyed that very much. So at the time, I am the oldest of four. I had a brother who was a year and a half younger than I. But this was Passover when the third child was being introduced into the household. And she was a little bit delicate health-wise. So we were sent, my brother and I, to live with our grandfather. Passover occurred during that time, and we were, what should he do with us? He decided to go through the entire Seder with us as if we were a crowd of adults of mixed ages, and he did. He started at page 1 of the Haggadah, and he went through the entire thing in Hebrew. So, except that we could both read and read the English, we otherwise didn't have any idea what was going on. It starts out, as you may know, with an unusual table, a table which features hard-boiled eggs cut in half and one egg left whole with salt water beside it. We dip the hard-boiled egg in salt water to remind us of the tears of our ancestors who were subject to discrimination in many ways and, in fact, slavery. And the other there were two other unusual dishes. One was matzah. This is what matzah looks like. I usually have it in the house all year round because I like it. And it's unleavened bread. I'll tell you why they had that in another couple of minutes. The third thing that was unusual is called charosis. It's a mixture of chopped apple and cinnamon and I forget what else, a few other things. And it resembles mortar used for bricks in those days, not bricks, but stone or whatever they were gluing together. The mortar was what the Hebrew slaves used to build the buildings for the Pharaoh and his family and his favored people. It happened that when Moses was a baby, he was placed in the river to save his life by his mother. And he was picked up in the basket from the river by the Pharaoh's daughter named Miriam. She became very fond of him and treated him as a son. Now, there's all kinds of contemporary explanations for that, but it's not very subtle. I think you can probably figure it out. But Moses grew up in the Pharaoh's court. He was a bright, well-treated boy, and he was much favored by the Pharaoh. So he was not acknowledged by the Jews as a Jew, those who knew the story. And he grew up as the, I want to say, right-hand man to the Pharaoh. One time, one of the Jewish slaves approached Moses and said, we're treated so badly. You're close to the Pharaoh and you're an understanding person. Why don't you go to him and ask him to improve conditions for us? He said, okay, and he tried it. But the Pharaoh said, get lost, in his whatever language he was using, Aramaic, I guess. And so Moses was entirely unsuccessful, and the conditions of slavery kept on going, and the Jews were more and more dissatisfied. And finally, a delegation of them was working on Jews was working on building something in a place where Moses came by. He passed along the road and heard and saw one of the Egyptian superintendents yelling at and hitting a worker who was trying his best but couldn't quite do it. He knocked the worker down, and Moses leaped into the fray and whacked the supervisor and accidentally actually killed him. So Moses figured, and anyone who knew him, you better get out of town. So he did. He escaped and was living somewhere well known to biblical scholars. Bob knows, I'm sure, but I don't. And he didn't come back until he was something like in his 70s, possibly 80 years old, because by that time he was well established as a responsible citizen in his community. He had a wife, he had a family, children, and whatever. So he did come back to Egypt because conditions had become just totally unacceptable to the Jews. They couldn't stand it anymore. They asked him to be their leader, and somehow or other he agreed. They also talked to Moses about the idea of escaping. Since he had escaped and done well with his life, they wanted to try the same thing. And so they did. They made plans for escaping these intolerable conditions, relinquishing their homes as a trade-off for freeing themselves from the Pharaoh's enslavement. So they planned to leave in the middle of the night with whatever they could pack. They, at that time, were accustomed to bake their bread every day on the outside ovens. But if they did that, they wouldn't, schedule-wise, be able to take their bread with them. So they baked unleavened bread. I'll show you again. Unleavened bread. And packed that instead of their regular bread, because that way they could grab it in the middle of the night and so forth. So this they did. They had a huge procession built up in the night of all the Jews in the community. This was a large procession, and Moses led them. And sooner or later, you know the story, they came to the river. Magic words were spoken in the guise of a plea to God to allow them to cross the river and to destroy the Pharaoh's army, which was in pursuit of them. And this is what happened. The river separated somehow. The Jews crossed. The Pharaoh's army started chasing him. The river closed up again. They were drowned, etc. A scene of huge consternation to the Egyptians, and in fact also to the Jews who were escaping, because having crossed the river, they were in unfamiliar territory. Like, what do we do next? They all turned to Moses. Moses didn't know. He hadn't been told by God exactly where they were to go, how they were to survive, what was expected of them, etc. So they fussed and fumed and wasted a great deal of energy arguing among themselves, arguing with Moses, considering whether this was the proper leadership, and mulling around as people often do. Some people did that at the beginning of our discovery of COVID-19 and wasted time, energy, and thought. And this is kind of the way people act sometimes, and they did. But sooner or later, they got it straightened out. God helped by sending what we now call manna from heaven, which was the vegetable that grew there. I'm not sure exactly how, that there are stories about how it does. And the exegesis of the history of that trip and the Jews in the desert has been so thoroughly published that I don't even want to say one word about it. So they flourished in one way or another and came down through the ages and produced moi. So when I and my brother Bernie were small, as I told you, our grandfather did a Seder for us. I got to ask the 4 questions, and luckily I had learned the 4 questions in English, in Yiddish, and in Hebrew. I spoke them in English and in Hebrew and enjoyed it very much, so I cannot resist this opportunity. Ma nishtana halala hazeh mikol halelos. That's it. There's more to it. I will stop there. It means, why is this night different from all other nights? And someday, if we go back to coffee hour, and if you ask me what is the joke based on that, question, I'll tell you the joke. And as you ask the 4 questions, the leader of the Seder, and of course that was my grandfather, takes his glass of wine. My grandfather liked red wine. He had a large glass of it. So he says in Hebrew, I will answer this question, but before he answers it, he takes a drink of wine. And since there are 4 questions and many long explanations, by the time he ends this section of the Seder, he's feeling pretty good. And usually by the end of the Seder, he has all he can do to keep up with saying the Hebrew, but we won't go into that part of it. And he explained to us that the reason this night is different is, and then he goes into the story about the Jews picking up their valuables and escaping sort of in the middle of the night, under the tentative leadership of Moses, because let's face it, he didn't know what he was doing. Nobody had done that before. He was making it up as he went along. So we went through that. Then the next question is, why on this night do we relax in our chairs, sit in armchairs at the table, when other nights we sit in straight chairs and sit at attention? And on third question, on other nights we eat bread or crackers or matzah, but tonight we eat only matzah. Well, of course, intervening before the 4th question, this Seder night has followed several days of cleaning the household of chametz, which is stuff that's not kosher for Passover, containing bread or flour. So theoretically, the Orthodox Jewish housewife goes through the entire house, every corner, cleaning it out, making sure no breadcrumbs are between the couch cushions, no breadcrumbs are under anybody's bed, da, 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 da. And whatever there is, even her silverware, has to be cleaned for Pesach. And the way she does that is to take the used silverware from, not silverware, but implements, whatever they were, and throw them into the dirt. And after they come out of the dirt, rub them with soil, and then wash them in whatever was their usual way. And that way they were sanctified, not by the rabbi. So they did all those routines and do them today. Orthodox people do that today. One of my aunts frightened another one out of her skull by screaming, "Ah, that's not the right fork!" Took it, threw it out an open window, and landed it in the yard. That was, anyway, that really happened not too long ago. So we asked the 4 questions. And then we continued to tell the story of Pesach as the Jews remember it. It includes that God put 10 curses on the Egyptians to scare them and to show them that the Jews had strength and the backing of their one God, not the Egyptian panoply of gods. So the 10 plagues are said one at a time in Hebrew. And each time you say the name of the plague, you take a drink of wine. The children have grape juice in a nice glass. And you say, Dom, which means the Hebrew word for blood. And you pour a little bit of your wine in a cup or some vessel. And then the second plague, Sfadeya, frogs. They drop frogs on everybody, I don't know. And then they pour again a little bit. Kinim, I've forgotten what that means, but it's something disgusting, I'm sure. And you go through all 10 of them. And then when you've poured this wine out into the other cup, you drink it. Well, it was okay for us kids. My grandfather was accustomed to drinking wine, so it didn't bother him a lot. And etc. I just looked at the time. we went through the entire Seder. By the time it ended, my brother and I were half asleep. My grandfather was 3 sheets to the wind. So after the Seder, we didn't play any games. We just went to bed. But I'll tell you one more thing. At the end of the Seder, and also at various points during the Seder, God, for some reason, tells the leader of the Seder that he has to wash his hands. And the way my grandfather said it, Al nitilas yadayim. He gets up, holds his hands up like this, goes to the kitchen, washes his hands, dries them, comes back. That adds a bit to the length of the Seder. So there were many, many, many memorable things that I remember about Seders. I'm sorry to say that the last few years I haven't had any Seder experience, but prior to that, I managed to sneak in on somebody's Seder, sometimes our own, every so often, every year. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I enjoyed very much remembering again.
Thank you, Anne. That was the most interesting telling that I've ever heard of it. I'd love to hear more. So thank you for doing that. And now we're going to move to joys and sorrows. We'll share our joys and sorrows. I will move a stone from our symbolic river to mark each joy or sorrow. Please keep your joys and sorrows short. Raise your hand to share, and we will unmute you to speak. If you have a joy or sorrow, I think at least 3 of us do have a sorrow, but don't want to speak it aloud. Know that our hearts are with you, and I will move a stone for those of you as well. And now our pastoral reading.
This is from the back of the hymnal, a reading by Nancy Wood. Hold on to what is good, even if it is a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree which stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. Hold on to my hand, even when I have gone away from you. Nancy Wood. And now some moments of silence. And now we have this time of the service in which we virtually pass the plate, receive your offering. We ask you to think about how much you can support the church, how much we need you to, and we hope that all will grow in that giving. And now Bruce will play the offertory. And now we thank you for your giving, and we bless the gifts you have given, and we appreciate it. There is a lot of great Easter music. For our video this morning, John Moore sent me this. It's a song that this couple called the Banksons sing together in the midst of the pandemic. You can feel their heart, their hope, their fear through an awful time. And now the Banksons. So in February 2009, we were touring with a group in Australia and New Zealand, and I got an email from Ken George, the TCUUC board president. Bob, can you do a sermon on Easter because we are without a minister? Sure, I write back. And then I did some head scratching. What do you say to UUs on Easter? I had little Methodist churches in West Virginia as I worked my way through college. They loved to sing, "Up from the grave he arose with a mighty conquest o'er his foes, and he lives forever with his saints to reign." Okay, not that for us. But what? Holidays and holy days are usually clusters of meaning. As a family event, you could say that Easter was a celebration about clothing. Do you remember as a child being adorned in a new outfit, a suit or a dress that was bought just for Easter? The one I remember was about 1950. My late brother there, Larry, and I, two young thugs, about 6 and 9, I think, that was a big deal, an outlay for our young single scraping mom. I remember it well because after she got us to pose, she went inside her parents' house where we were living, and we found an old truck tire down the alley. And we could curl around inside and be rolled by the other. He made me do it, didn't save me that Easter. And card makers and candy makers and florists, they find an economic message in Easter. Easter has a number of nature meanings. The earth is springing to life. Flowers capture that beauty and wonder, and the earth becomes green and beautiful again, spring after winter. That may not be so obvious in Florida as in northern parts, but we remember. The vitality of the good earth is always uplifting. Several years ago, Fred asked me if I could do a rain dance. We are praying for rain again, because the dried up creek behind our house doesn't bring on the winged tourists we so enjoy watching. To many, the holiday is a celebration of nature, new birth, new life, and the renewal of the earth. One of my favorite Easter stories is also a Christmas story. You've heard it from me before. It's The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. It starts under a Christmas tree where a boy, a toy rocking horse, tells an insecure toy rabbit that the boy loving you makes you real. And it takes a long time. And you look kind of shabby, wrinkled, and parts falling off or needing replacement when you get there. But when you are real, it doesn't matter so much how you look. And the story ends in spring with the toy rabbit becoming real and hopping away into the woods. Easter is quite a festival of nature. But we are in church or in congregation, so what about religious meanings? For many Christians, it's about Jesus and his continuing relevance. For me, that means his humanity and humaneness. His followers want to insist that he is still alive, but the question is how and why. The Council of Nicaea, CE 325, came up with formulae to state Jesus' divinity so that Christians would stop fighting with each other in Constantine's Roman Empire. Elaine Pagels, an historian of early Christianity, makes the case that Christians have been the worst religion when it comes to naming, demonizing, and punishing heresies. And heretics were whoever disagreed with the current orthodoxy, which kept changing. We might think that another religion vies for that title and is largely two groups of Islam who demonize each other, and often the US as the great Satan. But over 2 millennia, Pagels makes a pretty convincing case. I used to cover another congregation on the beach before I came to our service in Heston Hall. And that beach group used to love to bring in an evangelical choir from Hobe Sound. They sang and made the point about Jesus that it wasn't what he did, but who he was, over and over again. It wasn't what he did, but who he was. That seemed an odd point to me. But they were trying to sing and to say it was his divinity, not his actions, his life, his loving way we bow down to. I indigested that point all the while they were making it and realized that by emphasizing Jesus' divinity and not his actions, that meant you could tell yourself that you were in the door of salvation without comparing your actions to his. So his divinity secured your afterlife without his humanity reshaping anybody's. With that, I needed something that didn't exist: theological mailbox. So thanks a lot, Constantine. You got us settled on his divinity without it meaning very much. I always believed Jesus would roll over in that proverbial grave if he knew how his deeds of inclusiveness and acts against hypocrisy had been downplayed. Jesus seemed extraordinarily loving and inclusive and tolerant, and too many of his followers have been anything but. But it doesn't matter because it's not what he did, but who he was. My college religion prof said what many say: Christianity's decline began at Nicaea. So the religious meanings, the family memories, the nature meanings are as different as we all are. This year, I think, more than ever, it would be good to find strength to keep on going. Somehow now I need it to mean hope for now more than hope for the beyond. My favorite story of Easter in the Christian scripture is the ending of the Gospel of Mark, the oldest gospel, the first written, on which the others are based. It ends with two women going to the burial site, expecting to do death prep on Jesus' corpse, and they find the burial site empty. And the concluding words were, they were afraid and ran away and didn't tell anyone, leaving lots of questions, but also this truth. Sometimes, and this year of pandemic has been such a time, but sometimes we have to find the strength to keep going, juggling hope and fear. And for me anyway, neither one goes away. We have to call on what we have inside to keep going. I went up to Vero UU a couple weeks ago. I wanted to see what their in-person worship service looked like and felt like. They have a very large sanctuary, and places for one and two and families were marked and designated. About 50 people in masks, so the service was virtual, being live streamed, and in person. Reverend Scott Alexander announced the wrapping up of the stewardship drive and told them they just had to meet their goal because he was retiring. So on the way out, I wished him, enjoy your retirement. And he jovially shot back, well, you haven't been very good at it. Meaning I've left it twice to work here. We all have to find inside what we have or what we have to work on to keep going. For me, that's questions of faith, matters of faith that aren't settled. And so I'm not. Easter is also mainly about what is lasting, whether it's the earth, some sense of divinity or spirituality, or Jesus, or us, our soul, that metaphorical core in each of us. That's what we are living for. Many Christians believe Jesus survived death because they believe or want to believe that they too will survive death. I like the way our most senior member, Regina Lupu, ended one of our book studies on theories of the afterlife. Regina, who was then only about 95, said, "What's wrong with just dying?" I keep reverting to what I learned in college and still don't understand. And that is that eternal lasting is about quality and not about longevity. We've all read and felt that love is eternal. That means to me that people who have loved me well are still loving me, and I can feel that even though they are gone. Their love has been lasting, and that gives me strength to keep going. I have known love enough to know that that's what I should make my end in life. That's what I should be living for. For me, that's more important than what happens just before or just after my last breath. So that's the main part of us that will last, the loving we have been privileged to give and receive. I don't know how much more I need to know about lasting. Still, the loving we have in us keeps getting questioned. What does it make us do about George Floyd's life and all the others who have died too young, too innocent? We've got to make that stop happening. The people on the witness stand are too painful to watch. They feel guilty for not intervening, but they aren't the guilty ones. And the love in us can't rest with Asian background people fearing for their lives and their children in this country, their country. And my teammate here this morning, Deb, wants us to look into sponsoring the suffering parents and kids at the border, like we did for the boat people a half a century ago and a half a world away. Sometimes love doesn't tell you what to do, but it makes it pretty clear. You can't do nothing. One of the good things about Easter is we really can't tell each other what exactly it means, because it means many different things. I think it invites us to stop for some moments and think about what is lasting. Who has touched our lives in a lasting way, and whose life we might touch in a loving, lasting way yet. The closing hymn is number 29, a little Beethoven for Easter. Deb will extinguish the chalice during these closing words, and it's a gem from the back of the hymnal by Sarah York. We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown.
Some of you may know that that my partner Michael and I are moving back to Rhode Island this week. So this is the last opportunity I'll have to play in this beautiful sanctuary. But I will continue to Zoom until the church opens, and you'll see me in my living room in Rhode Island in 2 weeks. The closing postlude is a wonderful piece written by Joe Camacho, and the Hawaiian title is Kahaku'e. My friend in Hawaii translates it to mean to go where one pleases you. So Michael and I are downsizing so we can travel across the country, and I thought it was an appropriate way to end this service, but I'll I'll be back in 2 weeks.
I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say, Bruce, it's been a pure pleasure, and we're going to look forward to you continuing with us and visiting us in the future, I trust.